Hey everybody, my name is Ben and I work for the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters in the Lake Ontario Atlantic Salmon Restoration Program. Today I'm going to be talking a bit about the really cool world of fish and how to identify some of the freshwater fish species found in Ontario, Canada. A fish is a vertebrate, an animal that has a backbone, that lives in water, has gills so that it can breathe underwater, usually has fins and scales, and with very little exception is cold-blooded. There are over 34,000 living species of fish that have been identified in the world, and there are still many more yet to be discovered. Some of these fish live in saltwater, and some of them live in freshwater. A very few number of them can live in both saltwater and freshwater. Only 3% of the world's water is fresh, and most of this fresh water is locked up in glaciers or underground. Only a small fraction of the water is found in lakes, ponds, rivers, streams, and wetlands. And yet, of the more than 34,000 species of fish, 12,000 of them are found in fresh water. Ontario is home to 146 species of freshwater fish that have naturally reproducing populations. Behind me here is the OFAH Record Fish Registry, which has been developed to recognize the largest fish that have been legally angled in Ontario public waters. We're going to take a closer look at some of these fiberglass replicas to learn how to identify these fish from one another. Developing identification skills for things like birds, plants, rocks, fungus, and fish can be a very interesting doorway into learning about the wonders of nature. For people who fish, being able to identify the species that they're targeting or have caught is essential to be able to follow the fishing regulations that are in place to help protect the future populations of that species. How do we tell one species of fish from other species of fish? In simple terms, we're looking at characteristics of shapes, sizes, colors, the presence and absence of certain body parts, and the placement of body parts in relation to other parts of the fish. Let's start by familiarizing ourselves with some of the body parts of some familiar fish. Parts we want to pay attention to are the eye, the mouth, the gill cover, and the fins, which include the pectoral fins, the pelvic fins, the anal fin, the tail fin, which is properly called the caudal fin, the adipose fin, if it has one, and the dorsal fin. Some fish have one soft ray dorsal fin, and some have both a spiny ray and a soft ray dorsal fin. Some fish have unique features, like the whisker-like barbels on catfish and burbot, or the long dorsal fin of a bowfin, or the pincer-like mouth of the long-nosed gar, or the snake-like body of the American eel. Now let's take a closer look at some of the fish on this wall and highlight the key characteristics that differentiate them from one another. Starting with the smallmouth bass and the largemouth bass. At a quick glance, these fish look very similar. They both are medium-sized, deep-bodied fish with spiny and soft ray dorsal fins. But there are also some key differences. The reason that one is called a largemouth bass and the other is called a smallmouth bass is that the mouth on the largemouth bass extends past the eye, whereas the mouth of the smallmouth bass stops below the eye. The largemouth bass has a horizontal stripe down the side, whereas the smallmouth bass has vertical stripes. The largemouth bass has a more pronounced separation between the dorsal fins, and the smallmouth bass has red eyes. Now let's look at the really cool, large predatory northern pike and the muskellunge. Both fish have long, slender bodies, long, broad, flattened snouts, and they both have dorsal and anal fins that are located at the end of their body near the tail. Where they are different, though, is that the northern pike has light markings, often bean-shaped, on a dark background, whereas the muskellunge has dark markings, often stripes, on a light background. Some of the easiest and most common fish to catch are the panfish. These are small, but not tiny fish that are deep-bodied and are thin from side to side. These include the bluegill, which has a black spot on the ear flap and a black blotch near the back of the dorsal fin, and the pumpkin seed, which also has a black spot on the ear flap, but in addition has a red spot on the edge of the ear flap, and no black blotch on the dorsal fin. The salmon family, collectively known as salmonids, include salmon, trout, char, freshwater whitefish, and grayling. They all have slender bodies and this fleshy fin on their back near their tail called the adipose fin. Some members of this group, like lake trout, have a dark body with light spots, and other members, like our Atlantic salmon, have a light body with dark spots. In Lake Ontario, there are several species that look like Atlantic salmon. The rainbow trout, brown trout, Chinook salmon, and coho salmon. These fish can look very similar to one another. To differentiate them, the first things to look at are the gill cover and the tail. The rainbow trout, Chinook salmon, and coho salmon, all three of which were introduced into Ontario from the Pacific Ocean, have no spots on the gill covers, but do have spots on the tail, whereas the brown trout, introduced from Europe, and the Atlantic salmon, native to Lake Ontario, have spots on the gill covers and no spots on the tail. The rainbow trout has a pale mouth. The Chinook salmon has a black mouth and black gums. The coho salmon has a black mouth but pale gums, and spots only on the upper part of the tail. The brown trout has a pale mouth that extends past the eye and a square tail. The Atlantic salmon has a pale mouth that stops at the eye and a forked tail. Well, folks, I hope that you've enjoyed learning a bit about the identification of some of Ontario's freshwater fish. And I hope that you'll continue to learn about these fish, the many other freshwater fish in Ontario, other fish around the world, and the countless and fascinating other organisms we share this planet with. Take care, everybody.